Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. As you can see, we've got a guest, and we'll get to them very shortly. But before that, what is the Magical Learning Podcast? Well, the Magical Learning Podcast is a podcast that's run by Magical Learning, a training and facilitation company that's been running for over 25 years and partnered with global thought leaders like Robin Sharma and John Mattone. We like to bring some of our education and our passion for learning to our audience. So that's what we're doing here today with the podcast. And to meet the people in Magical Learning, let's start there and see how their week's been. So let's start. Graham, CEO, how are you going this week? How's things?
I'm good, Jez. I'm in Canberra at the moment. I feel sort of hobbit-ish looking up at a camera. I'm in my daughter's spare bedroom and her office is set up for her. And I'm going to give it a crink neck at the end of all of this. But for those of you who are watching, this should help you feel just better about life in general because you get to spend the entire time looking down at me. That's probably not a bad thing. Other than that, given that we have Selena with us today and it's all about numbers, my favourite number today is 3. And for those of you who are watching on the day or on a similar weekday to the one we recorded on, this is just getting too complicated. 3 more sleeps until Monday, folks. I'll stop there.
Thank you for joining us today, Graham. Danette, our Director of Learning, how are you going this week?
Yeah, Jez, I've had a great week, very full on. So I've run 7 half-day workshops in 5 days, done a bit of travelling, got to catch up with leggers, which was lovely, and am at home now, which is fabulous. And my last workshop started at 6 a.m. this morning, which is why I'm very fancy today for those that are watching on YouTube or Spotify.
Nice. And because you wanted to dress up to impress Selena.
Of course. And I should say, for the listeners and viewers who've been wondering, Dottie is still sitting on the eggs. Who knows what's going to happen?
Dottie being the guinea fowl. Awesome. Well, thank you, Danette. Thanks for joining us, and we appreciate the fashion. Lega's our graphic designer, website creator. How's things going?
Well, things are good. Speaking of website, there's a brand new one that we've launched this week. So if you go to magicallearning.com, we've got a fresh sort of face to the aesthetics. So that's exciting. Other than that, it's just been sort of good weather this week. So that's been really nice to experience sort of at this point in the year, especially in Melbourne. You never know when the weather is just going to be terrible for the next couple of months when that switch happens. So luckily it's held out another week. So been enjoying the sun. But yeah, otherwise, that's basically it, It's been good.
Yes, and just subtle details. You've also updated the YouTube banner for Magical Learning, so people can go check that out.
And our Instagram and our Facebook.
So there you go, a little bit of graphic design there for
our socials as well.
Well, that's great, Legas. Thank you for joining us. And Dr. Selena Fisk, data storyteller, author, speaker, doctor, friend of the podcast because you've been on the Adapt with Danette FM podcast, season 2, episode 5, for people to go check out more of this kind of conversation. But how are you going this week? How's things?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Jez. I've had a nice week. I got to play in the Cloud and Data Center conference space yesterday, which was kind of a new area for me. I felt a little bit out of my depth with lots of tech people around, but yeah, it was good fun, met lots of good people. So I've had an awesome week. And same with Allegra, I'm in Melbourne. So the sun's out, blue sky, cannot complain being in Melbourne.
That's it. It's actually in my background right now for people that want to check out the video of this podcast, YouTube and Spotify. You can go check that out and you can see the weather. Hopefully it won't change by the end of this podcast, but you can keep a live track on that throughout the recording session. So Dr. Selena, we're actually talking to you about a book called I'm Not a Numbers Person, which the headline alone, and people check out the cover there, Danette's holding it up. Very excited to chat about this. Now, this book is a couple of years old, but the headline, I'm Not a Numbers Person, is, I think, going to grab people's attention straight away. Did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about this book?
Yeah, so I am a data storyteller. I run my own business. I've been working in this space now for about 7 years full time after kind of working in roles as an employee for a number of years, just doing more and more work around data and putting it into action. For me, I guess the space I usually work in is people call me and go, hey, we have all this data and we're not using it very well. And so that's generally the people I work with. Like, how do we actually start to use it better so that it actually leads change for people, for clients, for the community, for the organization, like whoever I guess the user is. But I guess the main core of my work is these three pieces, and the idea is to get to data storytelling, but we can't do that without building our data literacy and having a really good understanding of the numbers, the metrics, know kind of how they're generated and what they mean. We need really good data visualizations because that's going to help us do the analysis and interpretation. And then the goal then is to use those two things to get to that piece around data storytelling. So the book really steps through, there's a chapter on data literacy, chapter on data viz, and then there's 2 chapters on the storytelling. So how do we look for insights and trends, and then how do we think about actions and next steps? So it's kind of, for me, it's almost it's a huge amount of my IP and my day-to-day work that's in one book. So usually when people go, which of your books is the best one for me to read, this one's my go-to.
Well, I think that's a great intro. I'm very excited to get into this conversation. And you're right, data storytelling. I think once you've sort of got an avenue in, it can be really interesting. And so I think we're going to have to get into today's conversation because I think your passion's already coming through the screen. So let's jump into Danette's question, because Danette, I think your conversation usually tees us up nicely. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your questions and why you chose them?
Yep. So in this day and age where there's lots of data and stuff, I'd love for you to share with our listeners and viewers why numbers are important.
Yeah. And look, I will start by saying, obviously, the book's called I'm Not a Numbers Person, because that's what people say all the time. So I don't want to freak people out about using numbers. But the reason why they are so powerful is because of all of the different types of data that we could possibly use or that we've got access to, using numbers is some of the most objective type of information that we have. So data can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. So quantitative are those numbers. And the qualitative data is awesome because it's people's perceptions. There's categories of data that we can collect. It's not as cut and dry, I guess, as a number in a spreadsheet or the visualization of numbers on a dashboard. And there's pros and cons of both types of information. So the numbers are the most objective type of data we have, whereas the qualitative is also, at the other end of that, it is the most subjective type of information that we have. So it's not right or wrong, I guess. Like, somebody's perception is their reality, and that's still valid data. But we've just got to be able to, I guess, remember that that is the most subjective information. And we can certainly use qualitative, but we want to be backing up our trends and insights with some of that more objective, harder data. In saying that, though, we can't just rely on numbers, because numbers often don't tell us anything about the context. They don't say anything about that, I guess, what's going on for that person, what's going on for that team. It doesn't draw in a whole lot of other qualitative understanding about, like, the market, the clients, the different geography, all of that. So we do have to kind of be able to harness both qualitative and quantitative, but the numbers really allow us to do that more objectively, and also to graph and visualize it and make it easier to see those trends and insights. So it's much easier to process and play with and make it look pretty as well in visualizations.
Love it, love it. And I have to say, when I started out and was doing my accounting degree, I actually said that to myself, that I wasn't a numbers person, that I sucked at math, etc. And I found that was a really limiting belief and is actually not true. So now I do a lot with numbers and stuff. So then I'm curious, what can people do if they think they're not a numbers person, but now they actually want to become more of a numbers person? Because I think, you know, we should all have this skill. Like, understanding numbers, I think, is super, super helpful. So what are some simple things they can do to start to become more of a numbers person?
Yeah, and I guess while it's a skill that we might want to develop and want to have, increasingly more and more employers in more fields, in more job types, are saying, actually, we need you to be across the numbers. Historically, this was something that was kind of run by or organized by analysts or the data people, if you like, and increasingly, more and more of us actually need to be able to at least kind of interpret, read it, understand it enough to be able to ask good questions and be curious about it and use it in our day-to-day role. So there's definitely an increased kind of expectation on all employees, not just the specific data people. So for me, how do you shift from being not a numbers person into being one? And, what you've said is it's a great example of that. It's actually shifting that mindset and that way of thinking. And, I love that your other podcast is about adaptability. This is about adaptability. It's kind of unlearning that perception that you have of yourself. And while it's all well and good to say, well, just stop thinking that you're not a numbers person, I think it's also really useful, though, to disconnect the idea that being good with numbers means that you're good at maths. We actually want to disconnect that idea of however you went in maths at school has a little bit of an impact, but it's pretty limited impact on whether or not you engage with numbers well in the workplace. So for me, really good data storytelling is more about the thinking skills and the engagement with the content. It just happens to be numbers. So if you're a really good critical thinker, or if you have really good analytical abilities, or if you think that you're good at, considering different sides of an argument or different perspectives, that's actually where those superpowers, if you can add the use of numbers into those superpowers, you're just going to build your capacity and skill exponentially, because it's less about the numbers and more about the thinking and the doing with that data. So I hope that I know that, it's never an easy answer, but I hope that kind of, for some people, helps demystify it a little bit, because I genuinely believe that we can all use numbers better and we can all be numbers people.
Yeah, and I love that answer, Selena. And I totally agree, because I still think I'm not great at some maths, like some of the abstract theoretical stuff.
Of course.
But numbers have become my friend.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank
And the
you.
thing about tech now is that you don't have to do the maths. That's not what it's about. So leave that stuff to the analysts. We just need to be able to read and interpret charts and ask really good questions about the information in it.
Love that. Thank you, Selena.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Danette. Great questions. Well, let's throw to and holding up the book there. Again, if you want to check out the video, you can jump over to YouTube or Spotify there and watch the video of this. Let's throw to Graham. Graham, what was your question? Tell us a little bit about why you chose it.
Just thinking about Talena's comment about being good at maths does not automatically equate to being competent in the whole data storytelling thing. And it reminded me of watching somebody reach for a calculator in a retail store the other day to add up a couple of numbers, and I half joked that I thought they just do it in their head, because that's what I would do sort of with an abacus. For those of you watching, don't just go off and Bing abacus because you don't understand what it is. We're not using the other search thing anymore. Everything's Binging now, by the way. I don't get paid for that, but I should. There's a story behind that. There seems to be a trend in many areas for us to just give it to AI to fix, or to come up with a solution, or to make it better, or just to do it. I haven't got the time. I am tired, to really badly paraphrase an ad from 500 years ago. So there is a tendency now just to use ChatGPT or a similar AI tool, everything that we used to do ourselves. Acknowledging that we don't necessarily have to have been good at maths at school. What's your take on people abrogating their responsibility to get better at data storytelling by just throwing it all at AI? I guess, is there still largely a human component to all of this, or can you literally just chuck it all at ChatGPT or a similar tool and say, give me all of the stuff that I want? And did any of that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking about this yesterday on stage. So yeah, it's very well timed also. There is no doubt that generative AI is phenomenal and has phenomenal capacity in processing huge amounts of data, visualizing it for us. And in the book, I talk through kind of these two questions about, we want to be looking for the trends and the insights first in the data, and then we think about our actions and what we're going to do with that information. And generative AI is amazing at, if we upload a data set or multiple data sets, generative AI is really good at identifying some of the key trends and insights in the data. And then in theory, I could say, well, what seems to be the most important and urgent thing that I need to act on? Okay, so Chatty says to me, well, I reckon this is the most important. And then I say back to Chatty, okay, well, what are some ways that in my business I could respond to that now that I know that that's the thing I need to work on? And Chatty could, give me 5 to 10 possible actions and solutions, and I could take that and run with it. The problem, as we know, is that any generative AI does not understand our context well enough. It doesn't understand the humans that are in our organization. They don't understand what previous priorities have been. It doesn't understand where we've directed our attention previously or what our broader priorities are now that sit with outside that data set or those data sets that we've uploaded. So I guess I don't have a definitive answer because it can be super powerful and, even analyzed data has been in Microsoft Excel now for a number of years, and that's definitely getting better. And it's, I guess, trying to predict the things that you're likely to ask questions about or want to know about, but it's never going to actually be able to do that. And because it's not obviously like the boots on the ground. It's brilliant at helping you identify things that you might have missed or bringing things to your attention, but it still needs to be processed and integrated into that human understanding. And then we've got to be, it's essentially an amazing tool. But equally, I see that it's really powerful. So say, for example, you have got to your insight or trend that's really urgent and important. It might be about profitability and say you were talking about the amount of, say your expenses are way too high, for example, and you go, okay, I upload all my financials and I say, what are some areas that I could kind of do or cut my expenses on, or what are some ideas that you could come up with? One of the really good things that generative AI does is that it is also very objective. So there's a good chance that it might actually identify things that you would have missed otherwise. So that's why I don't discourage people from using it, because it can actually give you really great ideas that you wouldn't have considered normally, and it brings those things to your attention. So even when people are really good at data storytelling, I encourage them to go to Chatty or whichever generative AI tool they use and just Google what some possible actions or solutions or next steps could be, because usually it confirms what you've already thought about and gives you those ideas that you've already been kind of mulling over. But for me, I love that generative AI can get us to think outside the box. We're so influenced by our background bias, our culture, all of kind of the confirmation bias that we bring to using data and to our role in our world. So I actually think generative AI is amazing at getting us to kind of break out of that a little bit and give us a bit more of an objective view of the world.
So at the end of the day, there's still, on some level, a role or a need for human,
Absolutely.
at least validation or verification of what comes out of.
For sure. And
the
prioritization, even. It might come up with 5 really good ideas, but as the human, you've got to be able to prioritize it, because, again, it's not going to know your context well enough to be able to do that.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Selena.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham. Leggers, I'm going to throw to you. What was your question?
So just as sort of like the visual designer of the company, I thought I would ask a visually based question. But how important is it to present visuals when discussing data and numbers?
Yeah, super important, right? Like, it's why you've just spent all that time redoing website and branding and stuff, because people pay attention to colors and design, and it's how we get to know brands and companies. And it's visually we really respond to visual information. So data's no different from from a mechanics kind of perspective. What a data visualization does is it drops the cognitive load for the viewer in terms of their engagement with the raw data. So if we were thinking about, if you had a massive spreadsheet of raw data that was, had 1 million cells worth of information, like, the human brain cannot possibly process that and use it well in that format. Like, you think about I'm in a crypto futures rabbit hole at the moment, and you think about the price of Bitcoin. It changes every second, and yet we can visualize the price of Bitcoin over the life of it over the last kind of 20 years or so. So there are millions and millions of data points that we can put into one visual, where we can see peaks and troughs, and we can make some inferences about what's going to happen in the future. And it's being able to, visualize it in that way that's incredibly powerful for the audience. In saying that, though, I guess it's really important, like in your visual design and graphic design, you've got to make really conscious design decisions about a visualization that you produce. So you have to think about, well, it's exactly the same as your world. What are we trying to convey? What are the most important messages that we want people to see first and foremost and up front? What are the sizes that we need to make things so that their attention is drawn to the right part of the visual that we want them paying attention to? I actually released a newsletter only a couple of days ago about why we need to stop using recommended charts in Microsoft Excel, because people just default to often the first chart option or the second chart option, because it's like, oh yeah, that looks great. Like, let's do that. It looks professional. That's cool. It's the standard Microsoft Excel blue and orange. I'm going to run with that. I might change some colors. But actually, as the data storyteller, we've got to make much more deliberate design decisions about our visual so that we're conveying really strong messaging to the person that we're sharing it with, because we want them to see what's going to help them answer the question, but also help us think about, well, what do we do with this information now? And what are those next steps? So, there is so much design work required by a data storyteller, either for their own visuals so that they can create them and make some that help answer really important questions that they've got, or if they're presenting that data to an audience or to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see why that would be the case as well. Because I wouldn't identify as a numbers person myself, as we've all sort of talked about. But I think when it's visualized, I have much more of like a visual sort of learning brain, and so I feel like having the visual outside of just someone telling me the sort of like results of the graph or whatever, I feel like helps me personally. So yeah, good to see that also helps everyone else.
Yeah. Well, and even for numbers people, it's like if you see a bar graph, you see the trend in the bars before you see the numbers.
Yeah.
You actually see the visual before you engage with the metric. So
Yeah.
not just you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Leggers. I'm going to ask my question now, but I wanted to kind of give a little context because I love your passion for data storytelling, which I think to some people, obviously they hear data and they can feel like that's a bit dry, but I think obviously listening to you, they can see there's so much energy and stuff built in there. And I think interestingly, what you're talking about before with math and data really reminded me of my own sort of journey into enjoying data a little bit. And that I think is for a lot of people, it's an entry point is sports, where they start seeing a lot of data, statistics, and then they can start to understand what that may or may not mean and interesting quirks that may come out of, those data sets. And that provides very interesting information. And I just another quick thing before I get to my question is that I think also when people think of data, they don't think necessarily that it's creative, but you can have so much creative fun with data. For example, like even when I started getting into some of the sports data, I tried to come up with my own creativity statistics. So kind of using like how creative is this athlete using kind of different dimensions. And even that had its own interesting results. So I guess for me, I have had my own journey with data and that's been briefly explained there, but I wanted to know from your perspective, what are some bits of data or a study that gets you really excited or stopped you in your tracks? I'm asking again because I see you're passionate around numbers and I'd love to know what numbers trigger your excitement and passion.
Yeah, I mean, I watch a lot of Australian rules football, so AFL, and I love the AFL app, and I'm literally on there tracking players and the distance that they've travelled. Like midfielders can run 18 kilometres in a game, like which is phenomenal. And there's AFL fantasy football points, so depending on the disposals they get, the kicks they get, all of that, so it actually starts to rank order, I guess, the players on the field. So I support the Brisbane Lions, who are reigning premiers. And so I love watching them play, but I actually like watching any footy. But it's a really hard question to answer, Jazz, because I just love it full stop. So I could, give you so many different examples. For me, Graham's just texting, chatting here saying he has to leave now because I'm a Brisbane Lions supporter. Please stay around, Graham. But I guess the thing for me that really got me into data storytelling, Graham's now trying to hide in his little hobbit hood. For me, it was being able to tangibly see the impact I had in my work. So that was kind of when it really started for me in a professional sense. So while there are so many different reasons why we would want to use data for tracking how we're going, for, for accountability in some contexts, for working towards a goal or a target, all of that, for me, it was deeply professionally rewarding to be able to see the progress that I was making and to have that really, I guess, more visible through an Excel spreadsheet, through numbers, because I was working so hard and I was going, okay, well, all of this time and effort that I'm spending on this thing, oh gosh, it's actually paying off. And I could see almost the fruits of my labor really tangibly in a spreadsheet. That's why I love it so much. And I played a lot of competitive netball and I used to always set myself a goal. So I was goalkeeper. And for me, as I was defending the goal. And so for me, my target each game was 10 turnovers. So a turnover is opposite in basketball to netball. A turnover is a good thing in netball, where you try and win possession of the ball. So I was aiming to get possession 10 times away from the attacking team. And so for me, that was really helpful. I knew that I was aiming, that 10 for a game, then broke down into 2 to 3 per quarter. And so I would know by quarter time, how's my game going? Like, do I need to lift? Am I actually smashing it? And I've got some really good numbers already. Like it again supported me with my performance, but also helped me reflect on what contribution am I making to this team. And it would absolutely direct my attention. Like if I didn't get many turnovers, it was usually because I wasn't moving my feet enough. I wasn't getting in the right position around the goal shooter. So it was like I was then translating I haven't really got to my goal yet, back to a really actionable goal that I could then set myself that I could take onto the court. So, it feels like a previous life. I used to be a maths and physical education teacher. So I'm definitely this combo of quite sporty and nerdy about numbers. So I am super competitive, but I think that's kind of where it started. And then in the professional sense, I could really see the change that was taking place really tangibly. And I was like, this is actually really cool. This is awesome. This is the kind of field I want to work in now. So that's how I guess I kind of ended up doing this as well.
Yeah, and I love that. I have to say, I love that you're even breaking it down to your netball game of expectations for yourself per quarter, and then you can convert that into actions based even in a netball game, even in a goalkeeper setting, even without a coach. You can basically do the maths and go, okay, this is what I need to adjust just based on the data, which is really interesting. Yeah. I was also going to say, I just one bit of sports data that really stood out to me. I think this was one of the places that actually started it for me, was when Steph Curry was like at his peak in the NBA and the best shooter of all time and all this stuff. The person who had the best shooting in the NBA was this guy called Rudy Gobert, okay, who most people have never heard of and wouldn't know much about. And that's the reason is he only shot when he was wide open and standing under the basket, and he's about 7'1". So It was an interesting data point. You'd hear like, this person's an amazing shooter, and you'd look at the data and this person would be massively ahead of them in percentage points, but it's because they never shot. And when they did, it was basically when they were only open. So even that bit of data sort of opened my eyes. Like if you don't have the correct bits of information, it can totally skew your interpretation of what you're looking at.
And that's a really good example of like Chatty not having the context. So ChatGPT could tell you who the best shooter is, but it doesn't necessarily, like unless you asked it for that context or unless you knew that, it's just going to spit out who are the top 5 shooters or whatever you ask for. So yeah, it's a great example of that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, thanks for that. Let's jump into Kanika's question here. And Kanika's written, I think this is a great one for you. What do people get wrong with data storytelling?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 types of data storytelling, actually. My book's about how do you engage in data storytelling in your general kind of day-to-day role. So with data that you have access to, and how do you kind of work with it with, say, your team or people around you. There's also the camp in data storytelling that is how do you convey data to an audience. So if you have to get up and convince a board, or you're convincing investors, or you're trying to motivate your team or your leaders to kind of take action or see that there's a clear priority that you all need to kind of pursue and come up with a solution for. That's a really obviously different use of data storytelling. They're very similar because we're thinking about what's the data that matters, what do we see in it, and what do we need to do. But obviously one is kind of collaborative and within our day-to-day role versus an audience. And I might just answer this, if that's okay, from the audience perspective, because I'm sure many of your listeners have sat through meetings where there is a data chart, slide after slide after slide after slide, and an absolute overwhelm of information. And so, when we the question is, what do people often get wrong with data storytelling? It is that as the data storyteller to an audience, we are curating that experience for the audience. I run, there's a workshop I run where I teach people a process of how to tell a really effective data story. And in that, I recommend that your data story should be no longer than a TED Talk. So 12 to 15 minutes. And that's hard. And I also challenge people to only think about doing 8 to 9 slides total for the whole presentation, maximum. And that's one chart per slide. That's not 10 charts on each slide. So it really is that idea that less is more. And, there's the saying, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And it's that idea of it's our responsibility if we're trying to convince an audience of something, a board, investors, whoever it might be, of something so that they get on board and do something with that information. We have to be incredibly ruthless about the data we choose to include in our presentation. Back to Allegra's question about the visualizations, we have to be very, very specific and deliberate about how we choose to visualize that information, how we draw people's attention to it, so that they get to a point by the end of that TED Talk length where they're going, oh gosh, we can't ignore this. We have to do something with it. Whereas the flip side is that if you sit in a presentation that is chart, 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 you get talked at for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you're cooked. Like, you cannot possibly process all of that information and then think really deliberately and clearly about what to do next, because you're like, hang on, what was slide 10? Like, what? I think I've missed something. And so it is, I guess, being very deliberate about that experience and always thinking about what the audience needs first and foremost as that data storyteller, in order to help get the best from them.
Yeah, that's really good. And, I think, Selena, you can probably have a lot of fun with different terms for that, like you're giving me chart burn or something if someone's doing too many charts. But anyway, like I love that. And I think that's actually very effective practical advice. So that's great. I think people should go check out that course to get the sort of more info there. I just want to get to Marg's question here to sort of round out the group questions here. And I think this one's sort of around people's sort of aversion to maths, maybe at school, or numbers in general. Marg asks, what do you find is an effective entry point to teaching people about numbers without their defense mechanisms triggering as soon as they see any maths?
Yeah. So obviously, it's the KISS principle, like keep it simple, obviously, and be really deliberate about what you share. Keep it, I often say to adults, if we were teaching like a kid something, a young person something, we would be very deliberate about how much we shared with them, how we stepped them through building that capacity and thinking skill as they become more confident and they learn more. And we've got to do the same with adults. Like, there are people who are really fearful. And so we have to rethink how we approach those conversations compared to, say, people who are super confident, or even people who are pretty open to the conversation, and have a bit of experience in the past. The other thing I would add to that is when we, I guess, think about the data conversations we have when we ask questions, there's often an assumption that when we're looking at data in a professional sense, that we're only ever looking at negatives and that we're only ever looking at things that haven't gone well or that need to be fixed. And there's a common perception with people that it's a real deficit model that we the approach that we take with the data. And that's not the case. Like, every data set will have positive, lessons, insights, trends that we can take from that information. So often I kind of encourage leaders that when they're working with people who are pretty apprehensive or quite fearful about the numbers, is literally to run the very first process or conversation or meeting around the good news stories. What are the bright spots? What are the things where we've made progress? What can you see? And start to build that muscle of asking good questions and being reflective of the numbers, but only through that really positive lens. And yeah, as I say, at the end of the day, we've got to treat adults like we would treat anybody learning a new skill for the first time. We can't just overwhelm them with information, just dump it all on them and expect that they're going to know how to read and interpret it and understand it. That's just not reality. In any other field, in any other type of information, we would never do that. But for some reason, unfortunately, sometimes it happens with data.
Well, great answer there, and a lot. I've taken so many notes here, so a lot to digest. I might grab some final thoughts though here because we've got to our team's questions here. I might grab some final thoughts from the team. So I might start with Graham. Graham, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
I just going back over my notes and thinking that. So, Nate, have you got another couple of hours spare now?
Sure.
Because we could, so many rabbit holes we could go down, not including the crypto futures thing. See that that's still adding. One of the things that stood out for me was the, and again, I have a, I want to acknowledge the clear bias around an over reliance on AI. But one of the things that sort of came through in a lot of in some of the questions, a lot of your responses was around the importance of planning, preparation in developing a story to share with an audience. And then a big part of that is understanding your audience better. So yes, we can use AI to some extent to help provide some prompts, some questions, some ideas about what might work for an audience, but a big chunk of not necessarily telling a story well, but telling the right story to the audience comes back to how well you understand the audience that you're talking to. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there, but I'll stop waffling. Thank you, Selena. It's been great chat again, as always. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Graham.
And only half joking. Sorry, only half joking about the lines.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the questions today. Great to have you on. Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, a couple of things stood out. The whole thing about AI and it doesn't have that context, the human side and stuff like that, which I really liked. Also, I love the bit about, if we give too much data, it just cognitively overloads people. So for people to think about the KISS principle is there for a very, very good reason. This week I was speaking at a conference about finance translating information so boards can make decisions. And again, just sort of going, the data is the raw stuff. You actually want to guide them to where are the insights for decision making. So great conversation. Always love your conversations with you, Selena. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Danette.
Awesome. And thanks, Danette. Great questions, insights. Lakers, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, I think it's something that you sort of brought up with most of the sort of questions here, but I think like you've mentioned that you have to be deliberate about how you data storytell, both in like, I guess the choice of which data you're presenting, the way you visualize it, the amount of data you're trying to say in the thing, how your audience will receive it, if it's good news versus the bad news data. So it's like, I think what I'm taking away from this is that there's a lot of like choices and deliberation that goes into data storytelling that is important and will like drastically influence how the audience actually understands the data at the end of the day. So I think that's a really great tip. And yeah, thank you for all of the conversations today. It was really great.
So, thanks, Lakers.
Nice, Lakers. Thank you. And Selena, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Just the one thing I will add is that it's important also to just recognize, and I know this is a bit of a different thought, but what I see in data as an insight is not necessarily what my audience will see as an insight, because an insight is inside me, comes from inside me. And that's that knowledge of context and the numbers and all of that. So yes, we have to be deliberate and, be, I guess, really discerning about what we do, but also really mindful of the fact that I could present that data in a data story to somebody else and they could go, oh yeah, I actually thought this was more important, or this was the most important thing, or the most urgent. And it's not wrong. It's just a different perspective. And I love that quote, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And it is so true when we think about data and use data. So I'll end on that one.
No, I love that. Well, Selena, people will be listening to this and they might want to pick up the book, so we'll get you to tell people where they can pick up I'm Not a Numbers Person. But also, if they've been listening to this and they've gone, you know what, I could listen to a little bit more, Selena, do you want to tell people where the best places to find those resources and to reach out to you?
Yeah, so the book and other resources are available on my website at selenafisk.com, and we ship internationally. And I have a podcast called Make Data Talk, and they're kind of 12 to 15-minute TED Talk length episodes, as you can imagine, on all things data. But I also write regularly on LinkedIn and on Substack. Yeah, so it's another two places.
Awesome. Well, we'll get those links out in the show notes so you can go check those out right now and continue your listening experience. Or you can head over to Adapt Season 2, Episode 5 and continue listening over there. Thank you, everybody who's been on the call, regular team. Selena, this has been a great chat. Thank you to everybody that's been listening and sharing. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.